men I know. He knows how to take his experience and transfer all of his skills. Excellent father, husband, and businessman. A true, he put resonance man, but he's a scientist. He meant Renaissance man. True Renaissance man. And I couldn't have said it better, bro. You know what I mean?
Facts.
Man, couldn't have said it better. Uh, now, being from Chicago on the South Side, and then we're about to get into more current.
Hmm.
Um, how many males that was in your circle, I would say, or maybe grew up around you? We'll put it that way. Did you say would you lost to prison, or maybe you lost to death, murder, things of this nature?
Hmm. I would probably say I was probably more sheltered for those that I had experience with that were in, that did the activities that I was doing. And so those that went to high school and that was around my neighborhood, I definitely lost, you know, a number of people
Like you
from.
would hear about people,
Oh
this
yeah,
person got shot.
and my neighbor. I mean, yes. So I'll give examples. I had um, my neighbors next door. They had three boys and a daughter, and the
Okay.
daughter youngest. And I would say that uh, they all started out in St. Leo in the education system,
Mm-hmm.
but because of changes in life and society and what people that you need to pay the bills and keep the lights running, and you got to do what you have to do. So when they weren't in that same type of a system, that's when you started seeing, as in my example, the fallout. So they might not have finished high school. They
Mm.
would have been in the service. Then going into the service, then they got caught up into some things that really changed their lives, and it
Mm.
turned them. So I had that as a direct example. And then this, when you talk about people around me, this was somebody that was older than me that I looked up to
Mm-hmm.
from a mentor perspective, coming along. But because, and I never forget, my neighbor wanted to be a pharmacist.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up down at SIU,
Mm-hmm.
couldn't make it at SIU. And I remember him coming back and saying that his first year was just so rough because he had a C average. And so he ended up withdrawing, and then he ended up joining the service. And then I think he got hooked or got some exposure to some LSD and some other crap, and he never was the same.
Never came back.
Entire life was just, a brother hanging out on the corners, walking, around, trying to, with his hand out asking for something. And this cat was sharp. He was this brother. He could play the saxophone
Wow.
like nobody else. He had a vision, direction,
Wow.
and it just immediately. So there's others that were in the neighborhood that I know of that that had
Succumb to sort of the pressures,
right.
some things you can't control. You were at this school in this environment, and then now things happen financially. Maybe the family splits. Now you're at the public school or the pre-prison, and it's a
Yep.
different environment, and it's different rules there. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I know what you mean.
You
Yeah.
go to
So
yeah. What?
those were so for me, those were the kind of some of the brothers and sisters that you kind of saw a diverge or a little bit of a split. But for the most part, everyone else that was at least in my circle, the good majority, I know we were there, high school, or I know the high schools that they went to. I know colleges. I know what their career aspirations or things that they ended up doing. So by and large, I would tell you, um, for me at least, my kind of sphere and circle it maintained itself. People maintained themselves. They achieved in their own, kind of different ways, but it wasn't like those that, how I think, as you said, through some form of timing ended up dropping out and ended up into other environments. And because of the environments and their exposure, it was a radical change. And so it was hard, for them to recover.
Okay.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to your 9-year-old self? Remember when you were 9, something that your wisdom, now that, man, if I knew that, would have been nice. Not what you would change, because you wouldn't change a thing, but what
Right.
advice would you give yourself? Might be reinforcement of things that,
Yeah. I would say the 9-year-old self, the reinforcement would be more with the outreach that we talked about in the networking, and being able at that time to gather more information and knowledge and other options. And again, I say that you always are. I'm a firm believer you're a product of your environment. And so I remember when our line, after we had went over, and we, you've heard us on, on
Greater Beta TV
and some of the stories, but you've been to my ship's crib, McKeever.
Man.
McKeever's exposure, when we went over as a line, they had a crib, that we went snow mobiling, in that was their second, kind of one of the homes. I didn't have that exposure as my 9-year-old self. So I was in college, and that's where I, had an understanding of, oh man, people got multiple cribs and
right.
and exposure that they get access to. So
generational wealth they're passing
Right.
down. Yeah.
So my 9-year-old self would be, grasping that. I think I did pretty good. I mean, I was able to, when I did get exposure, like to playing golf and there's things that I had access to, ice skating, that I didn't really get into engage with it as my 9-year-old self. So therefore it was not one of my major options for me to assess how can I leverage that.
Yeah. Yes, bro, and this may not be exactly what you're talking about, but yes, I've had people like, what do you mean you turned that invite down? You know what I mean? Why didn't you show up? I'd be like, yeah, the owner of the company and the district manager came out. They invited me to lunch. I'm not going out there. I'm about to go to McDonald's. You know what I mean? Yeah. But you might be good at what you're doing. You're great at what you're doing. So you're not worried about job security. You're not going to be a kiss butt. But it's not about being a kiss butt. It's about making moves.
Yeah. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. And before we check the chat for those great questions, so as a silverback, and we say that because Self Love and I, we want our silverback, as a big homie, so to speak, what advice would you give to a young male, urban, black, so-called, in Chicago on the South or West Side? Like, what advice would you give to him singularly? What's going to be important for him? If he's up against it, he might not have the parents you got. What's important?
And again, I would tell this to that individual, just like I would tell it to those that it might be right there for them, because even when it's in their face, they don't have the same possible appreciation. And that communication to me is, you have to have options. And you might think that I love this, I want to do this particular activity, but I always communicate and talk about, you need to have options. I tell it to my kids, and any others that I can speak to, because you want to be able to have those options and let those options build on themselves, and they will spread. And then you can decide, how to put a couple of different game plans together. So the options is critical. And so if something isn't what you thought it was going to be, you shouldn't quit. You should see it through until, you know, you can make sure that there's another option that you have and that you're getting access to. And again, for us that have, you know, had to go to, you know, Carter G. Woodson to have a place to study, or libraries, because that might have been the only spot that you could get to on, you know, there was something on the South Side, because you weren't going to get any kind of books, for example, in your options on, remember that library we had that was down on just past on 79th Street off of Loomis or whatever. You probably don't even know it. It was like, you know, one of these, you go in and they just got the books.
And if you needed a book, you had to order it and wait.
Right.
For the most part,
so,
yeah.
Yeah. So you needed to make yourself available to, you know, to have an option to go to another library in another location. And if that meant I had to get on a couple of buses in order to get over to 95th, you know, in Halsted, then that's the option that I needed to do. So I think you want to make sure that as you're doing these activities or things that you like, and then you can do the combination, because one of the other keys that I communicate is, you know, if it was a slam dunk or it was something so easy, somebody else would be doing it. Trust me. So you got to pay some dues as well. And so in order to have your options, that means you're going to have to investigate and try some different things in order to know what works.
Facts. Okay. Self, what you got in that chat, bro?
Charlie.